So now I'm very pleased to introduce our speakers. Oisín Duffy is our Surveys and Records Officer, and today he'll be giving an introduction to our citizen science portal and navigating our biodiversity maps. Michelle Judge is our data manager, and she'll be giving an overview of GBIF. I'll hand over to Oisín now.
Here's Richard. Thanks a million for that. So yeah, as Richard said, my name's Oisín Duffy. I'm the Surveys and Records Officer, and we're just going to kick straight into Ireland Citizen Science Portal. So basically, this is one of our kind of main pieces of data infrastructure, and this is all about kind of collecting data, how we actually get it into our system in the first place. And it's done through a whole suite of dedicated recording forms. So I'm sure there's a few of you out there that are already kind of well familiar with the recording portal itself. They can be submitted through the desktop web version. There previously was an app as well that we had, the Biodiversity Data Capture app. It's if you have it on your phone and as Android, it still works, but unfortunately, due to the latest updates to the Android system, it's no longer compatible on new phones. So if you are getting the new phone in the next while, it won't come across. It still does work for Apple iOS though. And I suppose biological recording is one of those things that might seem like quite a niche activity. I suppose in one way we're probably kind of preaching to talk to the converted here in a sense, but just to give you kind of a sense of scale, that in 2024 alone, there was over 150,000 records submitted. And with that as well, you're talking over about 8,000 different people that are individual recorders that are submitting data. So I suppose how that ends up really looking is just a bit of a schematic here to show just how kind of data feeds through our system in the first place. So the data comes in from the field recorders, yourselves, the general public, and it goes into the unvalidated database, which is effectively the citizen science portal itself. After that, there is a whole process around data validation, and that can be quite a lengthy process depending on how many records are submitted each year. Once the data validation process is completed, it will go into the validated database, which is considered biodiversity maps, and then from there it can be used for research. It can go on to GBIF, so it can be used by researchers, and then obviously the recorders themselves that submitted data can end up seeing their data again end up on the validated database, and it can go on to impact things like planning and conservation management, and even the IUCN red lists as well. Okay, so I suppose just for, I know as I said, we're kind of preaching to the converted in a lot of sense, but there might be people this is their first time kind of really hearing about biological recording. So the way that most people generally get into it is through what we consider casual recording, and that is, I suppose, exactly what the Citizen Science Portal is really set up there for. It can be everything from kind of group lists to one-off sightings. So the centre ourselves, we run a whole number of monitoring schemes and various different initiatives, and they're kind of based for all different levels of recorders, from beginner, complete beginners to national experts and things like that. And the recording initiatives are generally based around a number of different taxonomic groups. So, no matter almost like where you live or where you are in the country or your knowledge level, there will be some kind of scheme that is available for you as well. So I suppose casual recording in general, that's recording with no real set parameters. You can record what you like, when you like. You're not going out with a set methodology or anything like that. It's just basically what you see when you're out and about. It could just be making a small list of the species you see when you're out for a walk at lunchtime. It can be as basic as that. But one of the things is that casual recording is still can be very, very useful. People hear casual recording and they just assume that it's the common and widespread stuff, but you could end up making sightings of quite, rare or elusive species as well. So it's kind of worthwhile to mention that it does have a lot of applications in that way. And then I suppose once people get kind of a little bit more comfortable and they start getting their ID skills up and getting their eye into different species groups, they'll start making lists for things like their local area, and then they might start making lists for counties, and then they might start visiting another area. So it is one of those things. I'd say one of the only things about it is that it will make your lunchtime walk much longer. So just keep that in mind. I suppose just to mention as well, on the other side from casual recording are the monitoring schemes, and these are considered the kind of the gold standard really of biological recording. So in that regard, we run a number of monitoring schemes. One of the first ones we have is the butterfly monitoring scheme. So this is basically walking a fixed route known as a transect every week from April to September. That's obviously quite intensive, especially when you're starting out. So there are things like the 5-visit monitoring scheme, which breaks it down to just visiting a site five times throughout the year. And then also the garden butterfly monitoring scheme, which just basically is a 15-minute count of the butterflies that pass through your garden area. So all the monitoring schemes that we'll be looking at, effectively, you want to kind of start off doing the casual recording first, getting your eye in for the different species. And butterflies are a good one because there's only about 35 species, and in reality, you're probably looking at a lot less depending on where you are in the country. So it's there's lots of resources and guides because they're quite a a charismatic group, and we do have our own online courses and posters and the butterfly swatch as well. Similarly, there's a bumblebee monitoring scheme, so that involves walking the same thing as a fixed route from March to October, and that's just done once a month. And similarly, there is almost kind of what you consider almost like a reduced effort kind of versions of these as well. There's the fit counts, the flare timed insect counts. And it's basically just watching the patches of a certain particular species of a patch of flowers for about 10 minutes and counting how many insects visit. For that particular one, you don't actually even have to know the species necessarily. You just have to know the kind of groups they're in, whether it's a bumblebee, whether it's a wasp, whether it's a fly. Those are the kind of the groupings for the fit counts, really. And again, it's well worth getting involved, recording casually before you would sign up to those. And then I suppose outside of monitoring schemes, we do run Atlas projects and various different kind of recording initiatives. And one of those is the Ladybird Atlas 2025 project. So ladybirds are a really, really nice group. For the common species, they're relatively easy to identify. They are quite small, which is probably the main challenge. And there's a few of them that can look a wee bit alike. But generally, the majority of the recording that we're getting from the Ladybird Atlas is done on a casual basis. So it is worthwhile just keeping an eye out on the website. And if you're recording species, you will get things like quarterly newsletters, depend if you're recording ladybirds. And it's always worthwhile keeping out in the project websites as well, just to see what is happening in the place. And then just for, it's the wrong time of year, obviously, for now at the minute, but in about 6 months' time, this will be kind of or more, this will be the perfect scheme if you're looking to get involved in recording, but you just find that maybe it's too much and you don't know where to start. It's a Spring Flowers project, recording 20 chosen species. And basically, there's a whole project website for this as well that breaks down all the species you're finding. But it's a great time of year to start because if you try and get into plants in June, July, there's so much in flower and there's so many different similar species that are in flower at the same time. It can be kind of daunting. Whereas if you're starting in, February, March, April, it's really, really nice. There's one or two species that are popping up every couple of weeks, and they're usually quite distinctive as well. So that makes it quite easy to kind of get involved with. So how to get involved, what's next with it then? So generally with most people, they'll start off with a particular taxonomic group. And generally for most of the people we come across, that wildflowers or birds are generally the kind of the good gateways into biological recording. Generally, it's supposed birds are, come to gardens quite readily, and a lot of people are interested in bird watching. And with plants, you have that they don't run away on you, so it's actually quite easy to start recording them. The one thing I will say is that regardless of what group you do, if it's butterflies or it's bees, don't be daunted by all the species that you don't know. That eventually will come with time. And the other thing about it is that if there is a group that you're looking at and there's 100 species, you'll find that maybe only 30 or 40 of them are very, very common and widespread. So there's probably about over half that you don't have to be worrying about on every single walk. So that's a big thing. Is just kind of just to kind of keep that in consideration, that it eventually does come with time. If using an identification guide, try and use one that's based in Ireland if possible. The reason for this is that you'll get a lot of these guides and it's, a certain group of Europe or a certain group of Britain and Ireland, and invariably you can find that it nearly causes more confusion because there's a lot more species in Europe or in Britain than what we have. So there could be it can end up causing more confusion in that way. The other thing I would say is that, have fun with it. Don't feel like you have to record every single thing. If you don't know what something is, it's fine that you don't know what it is. You don't have to, make a guess to record stuff. You can go and use different resources online to try and figure out what it is. You can get in contact with yourselves as well if there's particular species that you're having difficulty with. But it should kind of make you feel like you're adding a whole new appreciation for nature once you can kind of add a name to things. That it does end up helping you feel like you're kind of more grounded in that. I suppose then if you are already taking the first few steps and you find yourself that you're struggling with certain groups, we do run a whole series of workshops and training courses. So basically they'll cover a whole range of different taxonomic groups. And it can be down to kind of the very complex kind of confusion species, down to like very kind of beginner-based survey methodologies for the monitoring scheme. So there's a whole host of workshops that are done throughout the year. So they'll probably be coming around next year again. I think we only have one left for this year, which is sold out. And I suppose the hope with it really is that workshops and training will help improve not only the quantity but also the quality of the records submitted through the Citizen Science portal. And with that as well, we also have our own series of resources. So there's ID booklets, there's the SWAT series that I'm sure some of you are familiar with, and then there's project-specific resources as well. There's also the e-learning platform now, which is very useful if you're looking to get involved in some of those groups and you're looking to do it kind of at your own pace and from the comfort of your own home as well. So back into the Citizen Science portal, it has a suite of dedicated online recording forms, which are generally split up into distinct taxonomic groups or for particular national surveys. So this, you'll see that there's birds, there's vascular plants, there's ladybirds. They're kind of split up into those general kind of areas. So it's generally very easy to find out what you want to record. If you can't find what you're looking to record, it's generally going to be in the other species recording form, which has the picture of the green tiger beetle on it. So if you can't find your group, chances are it's going to be in there. Just to kind of, I suppose, some people like the kind of gamified version of it. There is a recorder league and a county league that is there, so you can see how well you're doing compared to other recorders across the country. See how many species you're recording in comparison to other people, and then if people are looking at the counties as well, we have similar information on that. Probably the part of the portal that I would nearly be using the most is the species stats section. It's really, really useful because, as we said, the Citizen Science portal acts as basically an unvalidated database. So all the records that you see on there, you don't necessarily be considering them correct because they haven't been validated. So one of the great things about that is that it allows you though to see the kind of the recorder effort. It allows you to see where records are coming in from, and it can kind of give you a fairly good gauge on how many records have been submitted for a particular species over a particular time period. So I would use this on a regular basis just to kind of see the kind of general recorder effort and to see what species are coming anywhere. But just to have the caveat there, if you are going on looking for information to, using a report or anything like that, don't use the Citizen Science portal for that. It's biodiversity maps you want for that because that's the validated data. And then lastly, on the Citizen Science portal, the View My Records section, effectively it acts as your own personal database, and we'll actually look at that a little bit later just to show how that actually looks. But it's really, really useful for seeing your own recording activity kind of displayed in front of you. So the species stats section is the one that's on the screen right now. It's just really, really useful. If you're finding species and you're stuck between a few species, you can kind of basically search for the one that you're stuck between, and you can see how many records have come in for certain ones. So it can actually kind of help you a little bit in that regard, seeing where they've come in from around the country. And again, any of these names that are on the left hand side, there'll be hyperlinks so that when you click on those, you'll actually get a map that shows the kind of the recorder effort where those records are actually coming in from around the country. And even though, as I mentioned, it is unvalidated records, it still is quite a useful metric, just about the amount of species that are coming at a particular time of year. If there's a good number of painted ladies coming in over a certain weekend, that can nearly kind of be picked up on the species stats if you're wanting to notice or other people seeing it, if you're not on social media and things like that. And it also has a number of filters. You can do it for time periods, different taxonomic groups, and you can do it for threatened, protected, or invasive species as well. So as I mentioned in the View My Record section, this is kind of a really nice one, particularly just for personal, as a personal database, or if you're a local recording group or community group or tidy towns or whatever kind of group like that. That basically everyone could use a centralized email address, but still use your own name when you're submitting your records. And it allows you basically effectively to see your own recorder effort as you submit records. So this doesn't show the validated records and biodiversity maps. This basically shows all the records that you have submitted over time. And you can see that you can see from this map of Ireland, this shows some of the areas that I've been recording. So quite a few bits down in Waterford and quite a few bits in Donegal. And then whenever you're zoomed in close enough, it'll create this almost spiral of where you've been submitting records from, and each one of those can be clicked on, and then will tell you the species name, the location, spatial reference, the date of observation, and things like that. So really, really handy if you're looking to just look more about your own recorder effort. I mean, if you're into recording species, you're probably going to want to see where your own effort is going for. So it's a really kind of nicely displayed version of that. So I suppose one of the things is that one of the interesting ones that we always find is that more than half the people that submit a record each year only submit one. And a lot of times that comes down to, I think, people, only record maybe a novel event. So it's this thing, what is a record and why should I bother? Someone might notice a particular, might notice fox, or there might be a project run about foxes or hedgehogs. So they submit a record for that, but then they would think, well, I shouldn't be kind of recording the daisy from my garden, or I shouldn't be recording, the hawthorn that's in the hedgerow near the house. So it is that kind of thing of, all records are important, even the common and widespread stuff. It's our only real way of finding out more about, the various species and their ecology and habitat preferences and stuff like that. And the other thing is that it allows us to continually update the distribution maps so that information is there for policymakers and researchers, and of course for the general public as well. So I mean, recording is one of those things that it should be fun, but it is really important as well. And just to mention, there's this notion of the 4 Ws, and this is what the information that we need to basically have a valid biological record. So that's the who, when, where, what. So the who in this case is the recorder name and the email. The when is the date of observation. So that's basically just kind of, if you can retrospectively add records through the Citizen Science Portal, so that's great. You can just add that information in. The where is obviously the location, so that comes basically really in 3 parts: the actual location name itself, which is, if you can get down to the nearest townland, that's amazing, or the nearest village. The spatial reference, which is gained by interacting with the map of Ireland on the right-hand side of the screen. So you can see it says click map for grid reference. So you effectively just zoom in on that map until you find the area that you're in, and then plot a pin, and it'll fill out a spatial reference for you there. And then the very last thing is the species name. And again, as I said, if you don't know what something is, it's totally fine to not record things as well. Don't put yourself under any pressure in that regard. And I suppose the importance of these things is that these are all bits of information that we need to validate the records as well, which I'll talk about now shortly. So as I mentioned, Citizen Science Portal is the unvalidated database, and the Biodiversity Maps is the validated database. So the validation process itself it's all manual, really. All the records get checked individually. We look at all the kind of mandatory fields of information. There's some supplementary information on some of the recording forms, which can be quite useful. And things like the recorder, the record photos as well, are obviously really, really useful, just to kind of compound whether someone is seeing the species that they're actually looking at. There can be things about additional information or species description that can be really, really useful as well. And so after that process has taken place, the records can either be kind of accepted, rejected, or kept for further validation. They might need to go out to another specialist or something like that. And it's only after all that is completed that it's ready for Biodiversity Maps itself. So as Biodiversity Maps, I suppose, is like the other hand in the kind of data infrastructure. It's basically where all our distribution maps are displayed, and all the data is freely available to view online. So the validation part of this is really important. This is where you want to go if you are actually looking for proper information. So some of the functionality that we have on this, I'll actually look at the maps in a few slides. But basically, the main thing that I think people are using on this is the species search box. So that's on the right-hand side of the page. There's basically a field there that you can just type in any species, and it'll appear from a drop-down list, and you can search that one, and it'll go in to give you more information about it, and then the distribution as well. You can also do this by going into species if you're looking to sort by designations, or you're looking to sort by particular taxonomic groups. That can be very, very useful. And then by clicking on dataset as well at the top of the page, you can search for entire datasets. So we have a Ladybirds of Ireland dataset currently at the minute. We have a vascular plants dataset. So this can be really, really useful if you're looking to drill down into one particular taxonomic group. So that's just again showing there the species search box on the right hand side, it's highlighted with the red box, and then at the top of the page you have the home button, the maps, the datasets, and the species. So just to show what that ends up looking like, the species details page. So you've typed your species in, and you've chosen from the list. This is the next thing that you see. It's basically kind of all the information that we have on the species in relation to the records that we have. So this includes whether the species is threatened or protected, the number of records, and the amount of hectads that it covers across the country. Hectads are the 10-kilometre squares in which records are kind of measured in. And it also includes information on the oldest and most recent records, and even information on kind of the phenology or the earliest sighting and the latest sightings throughout the year. For some species, there'll be a picture present there as well, and there'll also be kind of links into things like the species profile. So that's just another view of that. So all information. So you can see already the distribution map on this side. You'll be clicking on the live map then to go into the map with the purple squares that we will be looking at here now. So basically the squares on biodiversity maps indicate where a species has actually been recorded from, and each one of the squares can be interrogated to find out the record details. So the best thing to do is, if you're looking for information about your particular area, is zoom in the map until you kind of get those higher resolution records. You'll see the squares become smaller as you zoom in for more detailed records. And then the base mapping can be changed to display to the kind of orthographic aerial photography or the discovery mapping, which could be really useful as well. There is a temporal filter that can be adjusted, and we'll take a little look at that, about how that actually appears on biodiversity maps. But if you're looking for all records from 2000 to 2019, and then you want to see what all the records look like in comparison to that, it can be really, really useful to have like side-by-side comparisons. And additional species can also be added to the map, and I'll show how that looks as well. So the first thing up is the actual species distribution maps themselves. So all the information is over on this left-hand side of the page. You can toggle on any of these features. So there's admin boundaries, there's national grids. The admin boundaries consider things like, the counties and any boundaries that are in there. You can toggle on habitats as well, and the national grid could be quite useful if you're looking for information within a particular 1 kilometre square or 10 kilometre square. The next thing to look at is over the right-hand side of the page, where it's highlighted with the red box, is the other features. So you have things like changing the type of mapping you're seeing, and then also further down at the very, very bottom, you have the temporal filter, which is really, really useful. And I think it's probably a feature on biodiversity maps that most people end up kind of missing or maybe overlooking a little bit. So just to show you how that ends up looking. So you can see the map on the left is records from just 2000 to 2019, and then the map on the right is for all records. So you can see on this right-hand side of the page, you click there on the little on the temporal filter button, and it'll give you a to and from option. So you can put in, January 2000 to December 2019, and that's the map that'll appear for you for a particular species. So this can be really, really useful if you're just looking to kind of get a grips on, you maybe even record a effort for some more kind of niche grips where work has gone on in recent years. And similarly, as well, as we mentioned, you can actually add another species. So it's another feature I think sometimes maybe slightly overlooked. So where you would usually just add one species, there is an option to add a second one. So here we have red squirrel and gray squirrel. So you can see the red squirrel is in the purple squares, the gray squirrel is in the yellow squares, and where they overlap, where both of them have been recorded from, is that kind of orange square. So that can be really, really useful if you're looking at finding out if there's species that have different kind of geographic regions or different kind of even habitat preferences and things like that. So I suppose the last thing just to mention is I mentioned that all the records that are on biodiversity maps can be interrogated. And what I mean by that is that effectively you keep zooming into a record until you see these smaller squares. And you can see this is actually at the center here. And when you click on one of these squares, then a box will appear with all of the record information. So you can see in this one that that's a 7-spot ladybird that I recorded back in 2013. So all that information is there to see it. If there was a photo with it, that'll be present. If there's any additional information, that'll also be present as well. But you can see that all the core information is there. There's a date present. There's obviously the spatial references here as well, and linked actually as a grid reference there. And the name and species name are both present as well. So you can do that, and it's worth mentioning if you click into it's a box, you can see that this one actually has 43 records just within this one square. So sometimes people will click on it and say that they can't find their particular record on for a particular species, and it might be that you have to cycle through the various lists. And the last thing I think to talk about on biodiversity maps is the report function. So this is a really, really useful feature on biodiversity maps. And effectively, you just go over, so the layers page is where you will normally see. If you scroll over to the reports and click on that, it'll allow you to create a report based on either a 1 kilometer, 2 kilometer, 10 kilometer square area, or it'll allow you to do it by kind of protected areas, or even to hand draw basically a polygon. So that can be just kind of started and finished in a particular area. And what you do is that you either plot out your map. If you're in close enough, you can actually draw the polygon, and if not, you can just drop the square on an area, and then you just generate a report. And from that, the behind the scenes, it'll work on generating the records that are associated with that particular square. And this is the type of information then eventually that you'll get. So you basically download an Excel form that will go through all the species that have been recorded there. It'll tell you the amount of times it's been recorded from the area, and then the date of the last record for that particular square. So it's very, very useful if you're doing, even if you're doing kind of any kind of ecological desktop survey. It can be very useful just to kind of get around on, is there protected species in the area? Is there threatened species in the area? Similarly, if you're doing something as a community group, or if you're just kind of an interested individual that's recording, it'll allow you to see what kind of species are found in the area. And it can also be quite useful then as well to almost check back to see the kind of species that you're finding. Potentially maybe you're recording one species and you notice there's a confusion species that's been recorded from there before. It might make you think to take another look at some of the species you're finding. So that's a super good one to have. And then I suppose just the last thing to mention is that there's a large and active recording network. And I suppose that's one of the things, as I said at the very start, it does seem like, people have the notion that it's kind of maybe a bit of a niche activity. But since the portal has opened, and from when our records begin, there's been records submitted from over 30,000 different individuals. In 2014 alone, there was 152,000 records submitted from almost 8,300 individual recorders. And one of the most amazing things I said at the start, that over half of all the people that submit records only submit one. There's a really small cohort of dedicated recorders out there that are submitting over 1,000 records each year. So that's that's a fairly kind of amazing amount of effort that people are going to. And I mean, there's some people that are actually doing much more than the 1,000 as well. So it's incredible. And it's worth mentioning that the recorder network includes members at all different skill levels, from complete beginners to professional ecologists and national experts. People that would be voluntarily doing validation for us as well also submit their data through it. And I suppose the great thing about it is that it's open and accessible for everyone. Anyone can become part of the recording network just by getting out there and actually submitting their citing. And I suppose that's kind of the whistle-top tour on the Citizen Science Portal and biodiversity maps. And I think I can hand over to Michelle now to talk a little bit about GBIF.
Thanks, Oisín. So I'm just going to take a second here to get control of the screen. So thanks for that great introduction about the maps and our recording portal. So my name is Michelle Judge, and I am the data manager here in the MBDC, and I'm also the GBIF node manager for Ireland as well. And that means that I manage all of the GBIF related activities within Ireland, and I ensure that the data that we publish in Ireland also feeds in to the global network. So I'm going to talk to you today about GBIF and show you the importance of the work of it. So feel free to ask questions in the question and answer section. And just a reminder that some of the questions in the chat, if there are questions in there, they might not be picked up. So what is GBIF? Well, GBIF, or the Global Biodiversity Information Facility, is an intergovernmental network and research infrastructure that has the overall purpose of providing anybody, anywhere, free and open access data on all types of life on Earth. So similarly to how Biodiversity Map works on a national scale, GBIF is very similar except on a global scale. So it was established in 2001, and it is a voluntary collaboration among governments and international organisations which are known as GBIF participants. These participants work via a common memorandum of understanding, which outlines the principles about sharing data globally, and it details how GBIF is governed and funded too. So each GBIF participant agrees to set up a node, and Ireland's node is based here in the MBDC, with me as the node manager, as I previously mentioned, and Gemma Weir from the National Parks and Wildlife Service as the head of delegation. So GBIF nodes coordinate all the in-country activities and ensure that data from the node is being mobilised or published in that global community. I also want to mention that Liam Lysett, our CEO here at the data centre, is currently sitting as the chair of the GBIF governing board, and he previously held both positions of the node manager and the head of delegation for Ireland. So the GBIF Secretariat, which is based in Denmark, manages the infrastructure and also manages the relationships between the nodes that keep GBIF going as a global community. So you will see from the infographic on the right-hand side of the slide a bit about the GBIF community and the data that they manage. So if you look at the bottom right-hand corner of the infographic, you can see that there are huge volumes of data being published on GBIF. This slide was taken from July this year, and the figure is 3.1 billion, but now that figure is more reflective of about 3.5 billion occurrence records. So absolutely phenomenal, considering we have 7 million on our national portal. These data are shared from thousands of different publishing institutions across the world as well. And at the minute, we're sitting at about 66 country participants. So here's a map of those participant countries. And membership fees for GBIF are based on the country's GDP or their gross domestic product. So countries with a higher GDP pay a higher membership to allow countries with a lower GDP still become members. Just because your country may not be a member of GBIF, it does not mean that you can't publish data from there. And this map shows the data publishing institutions from across the world. So you can see that membership really doesn't hinder data being mobilized from all these different countries. So this slide looks quite busy, but I promise I'll break it down in the next couple of slides. So don't be worried. But essentially, data managed by GBIF allows us to see the evidence which has been accumulated over hundreds of years on where species have lived and when they lived there. This is the infographic of the data flow within GBIF. So from the data providers on the left-hand side, feeding their different types of biodiversity data, and how it's managed in the center of the infographic, and to how it's used and by who on the right side of the graph. So starting with the left side of that, the infographic there, the evidence that feeds into GBIF takes many different forms, and it often starts out quite scattered and isolated, and it's sometimes inaccessible. There's also a range of data providers, such as museums. We have the field specimens, citizen scientists, like a lot of yourselves. We also have data coming in from universities, research institutes, and the data that all our different providers also comes in numerous different forms as well. So if we start at the top there with specimen data, so the specimens and the label that describes the specimens that are coming in museums contain vital evidence, and these evidence may literally be locked away in the drawers of our natural history museums and need to be mobilised. Occurrence or observation records from different surveys or monitoring or citizen scientists are often stored in various formats as well. Literature about the natural world, both historic and current, contain vital information on species occurrences and different types of data, but that information is often embedded and needs to be extracted so that we can map it and view it on the global scale. Automated wildlife records, example camera trapping, satellite imaging, or acoustic monitoring, add more to our evidence base too. And finally, large amount of data that are derived from the DNA sequencing of samples from the environment, or eDNA, provide evidence of previously hidden biodiversity. So the key to discovering and applying all of this evidence is through the use of what we call a set of common standards, or a common language, that helps us organize this data into an agreed format. And we always try and encourage everyone to publish their data through an open license, so that data can be shared not just nationally but globally as well. So once these data have been organized based on these shared set of standards, data sets can be shared through GBIF as well. So as well as sharing this data, GBIF also hosts a range of services. And one of the services that they host that is used by organizations or countries is their hosted portals, which can be viewed down there at the bottom right-hand side of that graphic. So in Ireland, we're lucky enough to have the national mapping portal, Biodiversity Maps, but a lot of countries or organizations don't have the infrastructure that we have. So they get a similar output through the use of these GBIF hosted portals, which allows them to consolidate their data in one place. So once published, these data can then be discovered by a range of users, including both research and policymakers. And I'm going to go into a bit more detail on how data from the MBDC and through GBIF are actually used on a day-to-day. So as I said, once we've brought all this data together, it's important to show what we can learn from it and how we can use it to inform research and push for sustainable development. So data shared through the MBDC and GBIF supports conservation by helping to identify the most important sites for protected areas, and also by underpinning species assessment risks. Another thing that it helps to do to support conservation is by tracking the actual or the predicted spread of invasive alien species, such as the Asian hornet that recently arrived in Ireland. Data shared through GBIF also supports food security, and this is through the mapping of the distribution of the wild relatives of our most important crops. And therefore, we know the locations of these genetic resources that need to be conserved for future plant breeding. Data shared through the MBDC and by GBIF also supports climate change actions. So by helping to model how species ranges may change under different climate scenarios, we can help inform adaptation strategies for the future. And finally, data shared through the MBDC and GBIF also supports human health. By tracking the distribution of these species that act as vectors, we can help stop the movement of these viruses through the world. So GBIF provides a lot of technical solutions, but essentially it is just a global community who work together to develop tools and guidance materials to manage and use these biodiversity data. So all these tools and guidance materials are freely available on the GBIF website. And if anyone is unfamiliar with the website, I would really recommend going and have a look at some of these materials. Node staff and the GBIF community are also encouraged to share skills and experiences during our regional and global meetings that take place yearly. There are also funding opportunities for countries and institutions to build capacity, and this is especially true for areas that might be very, very rich in biodiversity, but may not have a lot of funding available to either capture that biodiversity data or to mobilize it. So a bit about how Ireland fits into the GBIF network. So Ireland has been a GBIF member since 2008, and all of the open access data that we publish to biodiversity maps automatically gets pushed to GBIF as well. The image on the screen shows that the data that is coming from Ireland, so from biodiversity maps and some other research publishers, to GBIF. So we can see that over 4.4 million records or species occurrences are being pushed into the global network and being used how I described previously. The image on the right highlights the data that GBIF holds about Ireland. So it shows the importance of the global network, as we can see that there are almost 3 million further records added about Ireland from almost 500 publishers from countries outside of here. So interestingly, Belgium is a country that publishes the most amount of biodiversity data about Ireland, aside from Ireland itself, obviously. So each country or organisation within GBIF also has an activity reported generated about them yearly, and this highlights some of the summary stats and charts about the biodiversity in that country or organisation. The link to this activity report I have included here, but Rachel is going to drop it into the chat as well. So if anyone is interested, they can go and have a look at that. So similarly to how biodiversity maps works, the GBIF database can be interrogated by using the species search, which I'm going to show here. I just searched for the red fox, and you can see that instantaneously, similarly to the biodiversity maps, you have access to images and data about the red fox from across the world. As well as the occurrence records, there's also descriptions and conservation measures as well available. You can also search the GBIF database by dataset, and I just have the Ladybirds of Ireland dataset pulled up here. And again, you have instant access to the associated metadata, and you have the option of filtering the data by these options on the left-hand side. You can also zoom into the map like we have here on our national portal and interrogate the different dots if you're interested in certain regions of the country. And again, this can be done for any data set or any country in the world where data is available. GBIF have a really interesting tool, which is the citation tracking. And it allows us to easily see who have cited the data sets or the data coming from each institution or organisation. So I know the writing is quite small here, you might not be able to see it, but this is the Ladybirds of Ireland dataset, and it has actually been cited 40 times since it was loaded to GBIF, and it's cited in different articles, most of which are actually peer-reviewed journal articles that have been published, and the top 3 that are showing on the page here are actually published earlier this year. So even in Ireland, data from the NBDC is cited very highly in planning applications and other such documents, but we do hope to add some citation features to biodiversity maps in the next few years so we can more easily see how our data or how our national data is being used. The articles on the right-hand side are showing all the publications that are coming from Ireland using GBIF mediated data. And again, this is something that we hope to look at in the future within the centre. So this is my final slide, and then we can get on to some questions and answers. But it's just kind of highlighting the value of GBIF. And again, even though this is kind of on the global scale, it can be applied to, I suppose, the value of the data centre as well. So in 2023, GBIF issued a report to be done on their value, and I'm just going to highlight some of the key features that were found. So firstly, GBIF expands the scope of what is possible. 47% of their users reported they could not have achieved the same research outcomes without GBIF. The report found that for every €1 invested in GBIF, the user of that data gained €3 of benefits and society gained €12. The sources of value include the perceived value of access to open data, time saved, and the impact of the research completed. And finally, data from GBIF and more importantly from the NBDC supports the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, and 92% of GBIF users reported that they used GBIF mediated data in their reports to the SDGs. And Ireland itself has used data from the National Biodiversity Data Centre through our suite of national biodiversity indicators to report to the Convention of Biological Diversity as well. So that's all. Thank you all very much for listening. Rachel, do you want to come back on and we'll go through some questions and answers?
Yeah. Perfect. Thanks so much. Can I ask that you both bring your cameras on as well, and unmute yourselves for the Q&A? I'll just stop sharing the slides for this section as well. So we've been very lucky. We've a lot of questions after coming in before the webinar and during as well. But what I've seen is actually kind of a few key themes that seem to be coming out throughout all the questions. I suppose first, maybe Oisín, if I go to you, there was a few questions about the validation. So kind of like the timeline for validation, and maybe do we understand how many records get rejected, potentially just because there's some faults in the fields of submitting it. Would you have any insight into that?
Yeah, I suppose the time it takes to validate the records is it's almost a bit of a how long's a piece of string kind of situation, because it completely depends on how many records are submitted. So it's generally the quantity of data that's coming in will impact how long it takes. A group like Ladybirds, where we have the Atlas project going, they're getting updated on a monthly basis. So a record that you submit in May will be uploaded in June. So you can have a fairly kind of good situation that if you have a Ladybird record and it's not up on biodiversity maps, it might have been rejected in that case. In a group like birds or vascular plants, where we're receiving plus maybe 35,000 records in a season, it can be really, really difficult to get all those done at that same level. In fact, the plant validation is done on a quarterly basis. There's other taxonomic groups that are done on an annual basis. And I suppose outside of the validation that's done in-house in the centre here by data centre staff, there's also a lot of voluntary, like the national experts that are doing this are generally doing it voluntarily in their own time. So it's, for something like the Ladybirds, I do the validation for that, so I can say, yeah, it'll be up roughly the next month. For some of the other groups, it could be 6 months later, or it could be the next year later, technically, if it's validated on a longer scheme. And again, this similarly with the rejection rates, it completely depends on the group. Generally, with the Ladybird validation, we're having less than 3% of records that are rejected, because we can actively correct those because there's so few. But with some of the larger taxonomic groups, there's not always time to correct every single entry.
Perfect. And I've seen a few people just ask about maybe protected species and how they're shown on biodiversity maps or validated.
Well, I'll speak about how they're shown on biodiversity maps anyway. So we have a list of what we deem as sensitive species, and that list has been agreed with the help of the National Parks and Wildlife Service. And we do a couple of things. So for some species, for the likes of birds, especially during the nesting period, we wouldn't actually publish any data to biodiversity maps during the year that the bird was recorded. We would only publish that data the following year, just to be sure that any fledglings have fled. We also, for a range of different species, we would map them at a different resolution. So a lot of our records, and we're delighted to say they do come in at a quite fine resolution. They're mapped at 100 meters grid squares, but for our sensitive species, we map them at either 1 or 2 kilometer grid squares, and sometimes even at a lower resolution, so up to 10 kilometers. Yeah, but for the validation process, they go through the same validation as everything else.
Okay, perfect. And this is actually a question that came in before the workshop as well, but someone was saying it'd be great if the designations for all species would be updated. Do you have any update on that situation?
Yes. So this year we updated our taxonomic dictionary, and part of the work on that now is actually updating the designations that are associated with all those species. So that work is broadly done. There's a handful of other species from different taxonomic groups that are still outstanding on that, but that's be done in the next few weeks, really, to be honest, I'd say.
Yeah. Excellent. I think one thing that I keep seeing pop up is apps, obviously, especially with AI now. So there seems to be kind of a few questions that are similar, slightly different. A lot of people are looking for recommendations of apps. But I think really what would be interesting to know, and a few people have asked, is how does the portal work with pulling information from iNaturalist or other platforms, or is that something that we can do?
So with the apps, I mean, the apps have definitely come on leaps and bounds in the last decade or so. At one point, they were kind of fairly woeful, but nowadays they are coming on with fairly good accuracy, particularly for the common and widespread species, and particularly if you have a good phone. So the likes of iRecord, iNaturalist, Identify, or Observation are all seem very good in those fronts. Currently, we don't have any data sharing agreements to pull data in from those, but that is something that we are looking at probably for the next season, to be honest. But I mean, one of the things with the app store, the one downside always to the app store is the fact that it kind of reduced the level of learning, because you're just instantly told what it is without being told why it is what it is. So the way, if I was starting out in the morning using the apps, I would be using them to find out what something is and then work my way back to find out, well, what are the features that make it this particular species? Because it's nice to learn them rather than just always kind of be pointing and shooting with the app. But they definitely are getting there now.
Yeah, they're definitely a great tool to use, but like your more traditional ID books are probably the way to go. And as you said, it's great to be able to learn those skills as well. With that as well, someone asked, can AI be used to do predictive analysis trends for species populations? Michelle, if you want to jump in.
Yeah, so potentially, absolutely, it could. AI is just becoming to the forefront in the last number of years, and I think it's only going to get smarter and better as time goes on. But we're actually carrying out species population trends without the use of AI at the minute as well. So we have data coming in. Oisin mentioned the butterfly and the bumblebee monitoring schemes. They have been running since 2008 and 2012, and we have really good, high quality data. And every year we produce the population trends for them. There's also work being done on the dragonflies at the minute. The Dragonfly Atlas is going to be published in the next year, and there's also some species distributions carried out there. So we don't necessarily need it at the minute. We're working away absolutely perfectly without it. But it'd be interesting to see what comes in the next couple of years and what we're able to do.
Perfect. Thanks, Michelle. So one of the other questions we got in as well was, will the conservation status of birds be updated in line with the Birds of Conservation Concern Ireland?
Yeah, that'll be part of the designations exercise that we're carrying out now. So that, again, that should be another one of those ones that's done fairly soon.
Okay, perfect. There's been a few questions about, particularly about the data, being able to integrate it via GIS or alternative ones, looking at other environmental data sets like your water quality, air quality. Would you have any insights in that?
Yeah, so as Aisling went through with biodiversity maps, all of our open access or data that's published under an open access can be downloaded as a CSV file. So once we are cited correctly and whatever research or work has been done, you are freely available to use that data as you please and integrate it with whatever GIS programs you're using or whatever types of other environmental data that you're using as well. For some specific projects or for the likes of the National Parks and Wildlife, for their reporting for EU requirements, we did specific or we do generate specific exports from the database so we can give them geodatabases or different formats of the data as well. So if there is a big project going on, that's something that we can do. And again, in the next couple of years, we are going to be looking to set up some services so that people can draw different types of data in different formats down automatically, but that's a couple of years away.
Perfect. Thanks, Michelle. So I'll just go through some of the Q&As that have come in. So Maggie asked, is there currently a way for recorders to indicate that a submission relates specifically to a blue dot water body?
There would be nothing on the specific recording forms, but someone could put that information in the additional information section without any issues yet.
Okay, perfect. And I suppose, is there a specific data set for freshwater invertebrates?
There's data sets for the likes of stoneflies and mayflies, and I think there is an EPA-based one on macroinvertebrates as well. So there are data sets up there. The best thing is definitely going onto biodiversity maps and kind of playing around with either the species and then checking what data sets they're in, or just searching directly by the data sets as well can be really, really useful.
Perfect. So we have a question from Abby about recording marine species and particularly challenges around taking photos. I know for us, it's, we say the 4 Ws, and it's really important as well with the photo that helps with the validation process. So Abby mentioned that she finds it difficult to take photos. And that wouldn't carry her phone out to the mud flats or while rock pooling. Obviously, the potential of dropping or breaking the phone. So she said, I don't record anything despite living on the coast and having the time and knowledge to record. So would you have any recommendations around how people, particularly marine situations, can record?
Yeah, so I suppose it kind of comes down to the validator for the groups as well. So our validator for the marine groups wants a photo present with a record. I suppose it's, he sees it as the only way of being able to accurately stand over the data. And I suppose it is one of those things that is really important. I mean, if you're the validator for it, you have to be able to stand over it when it goes to biodiversity maps. In some cases, there is an option for, having maybe a species description or things like that, but completely understand there's just sometimes that you can't get the phone out to get a photo of something. But yeah, there's some of the validators that require a photo for everything, and then there's others where they're so common and widespread that you don't necessarily need the photos.
Francis said that I found issues with geolocation on modern phone apps. It can pose problems if you're looking to give coordinates with regards to fungal habitats, for instance, and the errors can be 0.5 to 2.2 kilometers distance. So I suppose for us, how would the mapping work on our systems?
Well, I suppose if you're using phone apps, I suppose it's coming down probably to actually the phone itself, I'd say, and maybe whatever way the app is interacting with it. I suppose anything that's submitted through the portal itself, you're plotting the pin on the map itself. So there's, while the phone app should be fairly good and the GPS and the phones are generally fairly accurate, like obviously the experience there is different. So I would suggest submitting directly through the portal, plotting the pin, because at least then you're assured that it's going to be not as far as 2.2 kilometers away.
Perfect.
And just to come in there at the end as well and say that if you do have a species and it has made its way to biodiversity maps and you spot an error, a very, very obvious error, you can always get in touch with us and we can edit that record as well. So to make sure that everything is as accurate as possible.
Perfect. That's a great point. I think that's a really nice point to end on as well. So we've just come up to the 1 o'clock mark. But again, thank you everyone for coming along today. And thank you, Oisín and Michelle, for giving such a great presentation. This recording will be available online in the coming days. But again, thank you and have a lovely Wednesday, guys.